and selecting our asset allocation, financial assets in particular, in a rising interest rate market is always fraught. We obviously attempt to do our best, but that volatility makes it for challenging times. The interest rate story also spills over to the housing market and consumer confidence. The housing market is under pressure, prices continue to fall, consumer sentiment and confidence falls with it. A lot of people, I think, are rightly observing that many of the mortgages in New Zealand have been on a fixed rather than floating basis, and therefore when you're dealing with a liability, a fixed rate is a good thing. But that's likely to be coming off through calendar 23, and the pressure is likely to be building in the household sector as a result of that, of those higher interest rates hitting households and dampening consumption. So there's a lot of that kind of white water ahead of us, combined obviously with the slowdown, and in that regard the housing market will assist, I think, in that slowdown. Bond markets are continuing to be under pressure, and unusually equity markets have kind of tended to move in sympathy under pressure with bond markets. But asset prices, I think the central theme is asset prices are falling. This is also accompanied by increasing pressure on cash flow in businesses. We also confront a New Zealand election at the end of next year, and we've had the by-election in Hamilton, and so we've also got a lot of political dynamics that will be unfolding through calendar 23. Government spending remains high as a source of inflationary pressure. The government seems to be content to allow monetary policy to do the heavy lifting as opposed to fiscal policy. And of course, fiscal policy tends to get a bit of oxygen in an election year. So I think that that combination is not good from an economic and consistent set of policies in 2023. So that's sort of an operating environment situation, and for Quayside, we obviously just simply summarise that as an increase in risk, and we keep our eye on this dynamically in terms of our asset allocation and ensuring that we've got the right calibrations in terms of the targeting, the rates of return that we target, and Brendan will no doubt give some more insight into that in his slide presentations. So let me come to the Port of Tauranga. The business at the port, I think, continues to perform very strongly, but the congestion and the arrival of ships off window. Perhaps if Lyndon can do that. Yeah, ships are still arriving off window and creating congestion issues for the port. As you can see there on the slide, 6 of 16 weekly container services are on time. So the supply chain challenges in the port businesses continue to be challenging. I think the port has done a very good job in managing that, and also putting price incentives in place, if you like, on shippers to be on time and to move their containers as quickly as is possible. The Environment Court hearing, which is tied to the Southern Berth extension, has been delayed, as you know, to March 2023, and we're obviously putting much effort preparatory-wise into presenting at that hearing, and we hopefully can look forward to a satisfactory result coming from the Environment Court at that time. Health and safety, that continues to be a very strong focus, both macro in the sector and micro at the Port of Tauranga. As you know, the government is paying very close attention to health and safety policies in the sector, given the fatalities, particularly in Auckland, that the sector has experienced. And I think the port has continued to work very hard to keep ahead of regulatory reform in the area, and I can certainly vouch as a director for the focus that this gets in both board and in management time. Capital investment continues to be made. The key example in that regard at present is the Ruakura Inland Port, which is scheduled to be open in early 2023. We're very excited about what that will enable for the business. Putting that terminal so close, with such close proximity to the port, will relieve congestion. It will mean that we've got far less distances to carry empty boxes or to freight oxygen around the country, so to speak. Coastal shipping is improving as a venue or as a source of transport in the nation, and we've got 2 services that are now actively supporting Tauranga in that regard. The focus on environmental reform and outcomes, I can also say, I think remains very high on the radar at the port, and we continue to be, very proactive in that space, as I'm sure the chairman will testify with me. So that's the port. We've got the next slide, which gives something of the numbers. You can see some key takeaways on those numbers. As the export business far and away exceeds the imports, 13.9 million tonnes of export business across the categories that are marked there, alongside 7.7 million of import tonnes, to give you a perspective on just the nature of the flows at the port. Ruakura will ameliorate that imbalance, because of course when you get that kind of imbalance, it does create congestion issues and empty container challenges being moved to the right locations, either to service exports or indeed deal with imports. So if I may, could I pass over to you, Brendan. Next slide.
Good morning, everyone. For those who don't know me, I'm Brendan Barnes. I'm the Chief Investment Officer at Quayside. Been in the role for 7 years now. This is my favourite slide to show people with regards to what we're trying to do. So Rob's articulated the port. This is the non-port portfolio, which is of increasing importance to Quayside. And what this slide really details is essentially what we're trying to do here, which is, in a nutshell, running to stand still. So if you look over the years, what investors have had to do to achieve this magical 7.5% kind of benchmark return, it's increasingly complex. So we're having to invest into multiple different asset classes, each which perform differently under different economic conditions. But if you look at that standard deviation number on the bottom, become increasingly risky. So we have to be prepared to take on more risk and lower liquidity of investments in order to get the same returns. I can only imagine post-pandemic what the 2025 breakdown looks like, but I'm pretty sure it'll be even more colourful. So most importantly for that, which is the next one, is for us to define what our investable universe is, essentially how we're going to break down our portfolio, and as Rob referred to, our asset allocation, portfolio construction to achieve those returns. So these are the boxes essentially which we're shooting for. Again, these all perform differently under different circumstances. And the next slide shows either where we are invested into now or where we see opportunities. So we've got quite good coverage. Prior to COVID, we were musing internally as to how diversified the portfolio was and whether it could handle a shock like we saw during the GFC, etc. And during the lockdown months, and by the time we came out, the portfolio was actually up. So that essentially proved the thesis somewhat. So how we've gone over, we've just got our September numbers in, so we're largely flat for both financial year 2022 with a 1.42% return. And here you can see how the different asset classes, the large ones being listed equity, private equity, and real assets, have performed differently over the periods, but overall giving us a relatively consistent return. That's interesting. But when we compare it to how we've gone against other institutional investors who run a similar model, so there's quite a lot of info on this one. So if you're looking at the left-hand side, that's Quayside's returns 1 year, 3 year, and 5 year. And the column immediately to the right of that is the average of everyone excluding Quayside. So what we can see, green is good and uncolored, well, not green is where we've underperformed. So we've outperformed investors on 1, 3, and 5 year returns. We've taken slightly more volatility over 3 years, but our return is nearly double what everyone else's. And over 5 years, nearly double again for fractionally more risk. So, and if you look down at our comparison with international investors, it's the same story, in particular around us achieving significantly greater returns while taking on a lot less risk. So we're pretty happy with the way the portfolio has performed, and we believe we can get that standard deviation down even further. Toi Moana, this is a separate pool of money, of which an increased amount came to us on the 1st of July this year. So this is 100% in listed equities. It's currently returning a 4.82% IRR, which is slightly below the 5% target. Cash yield is very strong at 4.5%. And it feels weird to be saying this, but we've started buying bonds again, which we haven't had to do for many years, where interest rates were. So we've added quite a number of high quality bonds into the portfolio, which are yielding around about 5.8%. So obviously that's pretty low risk. And just one case study I decided to put in. So obviously there was quite a bit of news around us acquiring a stake in PF Olsen, which is headquartered in Rotorua. This took quite a while to complete this transaction, but it's quite a good example of our investment strategy. As can be seen from the previous slides, forestry is a part of our investable universe as we've defined it, and it's a favourable asset class from a return and in particular volatility perspective. Trees really don't read the Financial Times, so if the log price isn't good, you can store them on the stump. Ultimately, we see this as bringing complementary opportunities to Quayside, and we think that we can not only grow this business substantially, but also likely the base of it in Rotorua and the number of full-time equivalent staff there. And we're actively getting involved in the business now, so it's really exciting. But I think it's a really good example of what Quayside can do.
Morena tātou, ko Lyndon Setawaho. I think the other part to the PF Olsen acquisition or investment is this does deliver regional benefit for Rotorua as well as the wider community, and some of that is clearly through job creation. And to Brendan's point, there is certainly a long-term strong thematic towards growth of the forestry industry. So we think PF Olsen is the leading player inside that industry, has an incredibly strong future, which again should deliver strong job growth for the region. There is clearly with the COVID or the Chinese government's COVID response, we are starting to see some of that ease. However, that has seen the performance of PF Olsen struggle in the last six months. So some of those geopolitical, issues do have an impact on the wider Quayside the Quayside portfolio. We do expect that to change. We are starting to see some of those restrictions eased. So we think economic activity coming out of China will start to see demand for Kiwi logs start to increase over time. If I could quickly just touch on the Rangiuru. Look, there's been some I'm sure those that have taken the commute have started to see a fair bit of soil being moved. Fair to say the summer season hasn't been particularly favourable in terms of summer conditions, but there'll be some farmers that are quite happy. But in terms of civil, not that great. Nonetheless, we have started making really strong progress in respect of the groundwork. And there are a number of different consents that are with various councils, and we're hopeful that they will be endorsed in the early new year. The interchange contract has been awarded, and that has started, and so that again is a further positive endorsement around the project. We are in consultation and working closely with Mana Whenua. There is we do intend to set up a Mana Whenua working group. That is something we will pose to Tapaweka, and again that will be in the new year. And we think there's clearly having that working group, I think, is vital to ensure that Mana Whenua is absolutely part of any decision making and direction that we do undertake in respect of Rangiuru. This project is of, I guess, for me, this project is not without its challenges. If you were a straight commercial developer, it would be probably unlikely you would embark on this project. So there is significant risks, both commercial as well as environmental and the likes. But I think that's a really, it should be a strong signal to this council that the mandate that you have bestowed upon us in terms of the strategic direction of Rangiuru is something that we're incredibly excited about, and we are embarking. And I think, from the level of inquiry we are starting to receive from future tenants, this will be a strategically vital part of the industrial framework that supports our region. So in respect of tenant demand, we had a very exciting conversation yesterday with an incredibly well-known listed company. They are looking for 6 hectares, and they've already started sending very strong signals around the type of footprint, environmental standards they're expecting. And I think as a cornerstone tenant, that has huge benefits not only for the region but also for the development, where you have someone of that status, coming into your region, into your industrial park as a first mover. That will send an incredibly strong signal to the rest of the market that Rangiuru is alive and well.
Eamon, are we to wait till the end?
There's relevant questions. You don't mind being interrupted, Linda?
Not at all.
Yeah, thank you. The environmental risks associated with the project, what are they?
Oh, there are a number. There is geotech issues. There is low-lying peat soil as well. We have an incredibly strong responsibility, given who we are owned by as well, that our treatment of water and stormwater is something that we need to mitigate and adhere to the highest possible standards. The exciting thing, if I was to talk about the future tenant that we had yesterday, is wanting to embark on a 6-star development. Again, in terms of setting the standard for other potential tenants, I think that's, we have to be patient around our first tenant. We have to get the right tenant to set the standard and the benchmark for others to follow. ESG, I thought it was just important to provide some comfort to the council. This is absolutely topical for both management and the Quayside board. We now have an established roadmap that'll take us through to the end of FY23, where we will be reporting in line with the new accounting standards. This will be 12 months prior to what legislation requires us to do. We think that's an important statement to make both to the wider community, but also yourselves. We are clearly going to have to work very closely with council in terms of taking a very integrated approach and ensuring that any data that we collect aligns with your requirements and your targets. And when we do take investment decisions, or we undertake investment decisions, we are not just looking at a commercial lens. We absolutely need to, or we do, undertake a strong ESG approach. Brendan can provide some context around where we have undertaken that if there are further questions. And just lastly, in terms of stakeholder engagement, it's now been, excuse me, it's now been 10 weeks in the seat. So I've certainly been out and about, but I just wanted to again provide some comfort that in the new year, we have a lot of work to do in respect of defining what our strategy looks like, which is scheduled for March 2022. Clearly your directors will be, or your councillors will have a considerable amount of input into that forum. We've actually also asked Chairman Leader to come along and open that session in terms of scene setting. So we'll certainly have a significant amount of input into the construct of that day. March 23, that is correct. Typo. Good.
Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off in midstream. I've got two questions. The first one is around the interest rate environment and the potential reset of the PPS and what that might mean if we've got, if we're looking at being reset upwards of, say, 7 or 8%. Are you thinking about the timing for repayment of the PPS as a result of this? Is this part of your thinking?
Yes, very much so, Councillor Needs. We have undertaken a piece of work there. The impact will be considerable when you're coming from an interest rate environment that had that 200 million set, I think it was 2.54. It is likely that will be, possibly 2, possibly 3 times higher. So, it is a significant impact. There is a multitude of different optionality that we need to consider, but that work is underway. We have got some external advice already embarking on that work as well alongside us. And then I guess once we have that independent view, that is something we're going to have to opine on.
And you'll be involving us in that discussion because obviously we're a bit of a partnership here.
100%.
Yeah, great. My other question is when you're getting out and about and you're visiting, I presume, the TLAs, have you had any visibility of the business case that's been underway for an eastern town that's being undertaken by Western Bay District Council?
No, I haven't. In respect to the engagement with TLAs up to this juncture has largely been with management. I have sent an email out to the various TLAs with a view of trying to get in front of councillors in the new year. So that's, I guess, been, I've spoken to in the wider presentation that those are, I think, key stakeholder events that we need to embark on in the first quarter.
Lyndon, a question from me following on from Councillor Nees. The reset of the PPS locks in for 3 years. The repayment is set at the dollar or whatever the liquidity or the latest trade is for the 10 days. Got any call on where the local, because it would be minimal liquidity, I would think. What are the local trades?
I'm going to say there's very little liquidity when I last looked.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I think that it was trading at 96 cents in the dollar.
96 was the last number I saw.
Okay.
But it ought to come, obviously as the market contemplates liquidation of those, then it'll come back to 100. But, one of the things to bear in mind about the PPS was that it was put there for a tax effective subsidy to borrowing. So, and that tax effective subsidy comes back into as an offsetting positive, if you like, to the negative of the rising interest rate. But as the interest rates rise, the tax benefit actually gets bigger. So that's why I think, we would have to evaluate the cost of that PPS against the alternative funding source to refinance it. So it's not entirely clear to me whether that cut translates to an abandonment of the PPS at this point.
Thanks to Rob. So we've got Councillor McDonald, McMillan, and then Thompson.
I've got a question about your engaging with Mana Whenua. Do they have the capacity to be engaging in that space with you?
In respect of the investment space, uncertain yet. I would like to hope so. I think the first step for me is kānui ki te kānui and have the chance to listen and engage. And as those relationships deepen, I would like to hope there are opportunities for co-investment.
Would you look at providing some support to them if there is a lacking in that capacity?
I think that's imperative. Same time, you do need to be a bit careful around conflict management if you're trying to push your own project. But nonetheless, I think that is an ancillary service that we can provide iwi. We have a very skilled and very technically strong team. That was part of the reason of showcasing the likes of Brendan to the council, and I think that's something around regional benefit that that we can certainly value add to iwi relationships.
Councillor McMillan.
Just going back to Rangiuru, in that it's on peat soil, and obviously environmentally that's significant. What's happening in terms of offsetting that? And I'm just thinking, Rangiuru is a shop window for Quayside, and all eyes are going to be on it, and it needs to be better than good environmentally. Otherwise, the community won't be happy, and nor will the environment, obviously. So are there I know it costs more, but what are the offsets because of the nature of that construction site?
Yeah, it is early days. I envisage, actually, I'll take a step back. I have had conversations with neighbours that have been, also worried about, the development taking place next door to themselves. Certainly some of the big concerns was around transferring of dirty industry to their own backyard. I don't think that is something that Quayside supports. I think it's imperative that we adopt the higher standards, both from a regulatory perspective, but also to adhere to iwi expectations. Often mana whenua have a higher aspiration than potentially regulations. So again, I think there's a lot of consultation that we have to undertake, but certainly the ambition is to, from a sustainability perspective, is to be, the benchmark and world class.
Councillor Thompson.
Thank you. Just two questions. Firstly, how do you monitor the port's licence to occupy within its relevant communities? And secondly, what did you take away from your meeting with Bay of Connections and the regional economic development agencies?
I'll answer the second question first. Rob, I might need some help on the port. Look, that was a very engaging hui. There was quite a bit of passion in the room. I particularly enjoyed where the clarity that the EDAs shared with us around their expectations. I thought that was, it's good to know and good to understand, positive to understand. Some respects, I think having real clarity about our own strategy and our own direction is just as imperative. I do reflect on the Toi EDA chair who's unequivocally spoke to his ambition for iwi. I liked hearing that, and again, I think that's something we can embark on in terms of getting that absolute clarity. I think it was very important for us to go and listen, and I thought both Chairman Leader and Fiona and Matt, I think did a great job in articulating the regional benefits that this regional council has delivered over a very sustainable period of time. It did probably, I would like to hope it actually got rid of some myths. And I think that's really important in terms of having very honest and transparent conversations with the community at large.
In terms of environmental, obviously myself and your chairman sitting on the port as directors, sort of inside the company as a stakeholder looking at the world from inside the port out. But so if I just go through sort of the key disciplines, if you like, on environmental monitoring, obviously we have the function inside the port that Dan Kneebone looks after is very focused on compliance with regulation. So as a minimum, compliance is a non-negotiable. And as again, your chairman would testify, the time that is spent in the boardroom and the papers that come to the board on that topic from Dan are extensive. And so you have that discipline exerting itself. You've also obviously got the regulatory disciplines in terms of monitoring, and you've also got the accounting reporting that's coming up, and the port is trying to remain in front of. Over and above the commercial stakeholder pressure that comes from people about environmental standards at the port, it's something the port is highly sensitised to. But if we then look at sort of specifics, I mean, we've got additional wind fencing that's been undertaken at the port on a rather continuous basis for the last at least 3 years. There's been a massive increase in wharf sweeping and the bulk handling procedures, a 5.6% reduction from our dust monitoring, for example, over the past year, and the generation of dust efforts to try and mitigate those are also constantly in play. The regular testing for suspended solids, heavy metal toxicants, other contaminants in the water is part of an ongoing quality monitoring program. The Matarai Trust Support has several projects in relation to environment, pipi research, wetland restoration, Manaaki and the Manaaki Te Awanui Trust Monitoring and Research Vessel working in that area. And from the 1st of January this year, all methyl bromide fumigations required to apply full recapture technology, and a very extensive uplift and debarking of logs. Decarbonisation, total greenhouse gas emissions reduced by 2.1% for the year, and carbon emission intensity also reduced substantially in the year. So these are spot examples. That last measure decreased by 0.6%. But these are sort of spot measures, as I say, that are continuously pursued and hopefully expanded. So the noise is always, I think, there, and in some respects that's a good thing in terms of just maintaining the discipline and the focus. And I don't know whether, Mr. Chairman, you might want to add anything from your perspective on the board alongside me.
I'd just like to echo Sir Rob's comments, but what he didn't say is that the port itself, at its own cost, is investing in numerous air quality monitors. But where I think we've got to get better, the community's got to understand, is that some of these PM10 exceedances, we've got to understand and get better at separating out I think they refer to as anthropogenic contaminants that trigger those, because I think the website says you had a PM10 exceedance today. The community probably say, there we go, another one. But the base cause of what it actually is comes after the event, and it's not well understood. So we've got to get better at that, because I think in the last few years, Fiona, there have been not insignificant number of those anthropogenic things. I mean, probably similar to like today's environment you've got out there. But as Sir Rob said, the port is really taking high interest in that. And I think collaboration between the port in installing these monitors at their own cost and the relationship they had with consenting the compliance people at Regional Council here is high. Councillor McDonald.
My question is to you, Lyndon. Just applauding, your engagement with Mana Whenua. My question is around Mana Whenua in regards to the Port of Tauranga. And I know we're looking at environment court hearing, and we also have an unsettled treaty settlement for Tauranga Moana. So, the timing is probably a wee bit more difficult. But have you had any discussions or ideas around the role you play in relation to the involvement of Mana Whenua in relation to the Port of Tauranga?
Yes, I do. I have had the chance to initially meet Polder and received some quite interesting, feedback and insights. Same time, I have clearly had the chance to meet with, engage with the executive of the Port of Tauranga, and I do see a role where Quayside can help bring parties together. What those, I guess, tactics look like, just at this stage, still being formulated, but nonetheless, I don't see us being a sideline participant. I'd like to think that we have the chance to help influence and bring parties together.
Councillor Reti.
Got it, Mr. Chair. Councillor McDonald and I must be in sync. My question was around the Environment Court hearings with the extensions of the wharf, and obviously some of this has also been played out in the media, and Tangata Whenua have been very firm in the position that they hold. Of course, just up there we have relationships with mana whenua, iwi relationships. My question is, if we are successful, of course, as a business, you want to be successful in that Environment Court hearing, what steps is Quayside and the Port taking to repair those relationships? And I'm talking about actual steps that, how much work is being done. If we are successful, if the Port is successful in the Environment Court, on ways that they can repair those relationships, because I think it's very important for us as the owners, because we also have relationships that we have to hold. And as far as the mana whenua is concerned, the Port is us, and the Regional Council is the Port to a great extent, and that's a tension that we're always having to think about. So I guess I would like to know what role can we play as a Regional Council, because I think it is a multi-tiered, intersectional relationship conversation, as all relationships are, and how are we going to coordinate with the Port and with Quayside to make sure that there are mutually beneficial outcomes at the end of the hearing?
Yeah, I can't speak too much on the Port direction just at this stage, because that is early engagement for myself, and likewise with iwi. But it's not I don't think there's one sort of linear outcome here, and I guess my approach at this point, I know my approach at this stage is kānoi ki te kānoi, and then understand what those expectations are and see if we can help broker something that where all parties can have mutually beneficial outcomes. What that looks like today, I can't articulate, because it is very early. But there's certainly a desire to keep close to both.
Perhaps I could add something. I think it does start with the Port, and that the transactional relationship, if you like, is Port to iwi, and so getting the Port's actions in the best shape, I think, is the priority. And I remain optimistic underlyingly. First, because I believe that the environmental impact of the berth extension should be acceptable to iwi, in terms of the science that we have undertake, the research and the science that we undertake, and indeed even our dialogue with iwi, wearing a Port hat, which I've been party to, where Potter, for example, has come, as have others, to our board room to have dialogue, kōrero, and I think that that I feel confident, because the base case is not damaging to the environment, is what I believe. Now, there's many environmental aspects. There's actually the marine environment, but there's also air pollution and that kind of thing, particularly with Whareroa Marae, in terms of a concern about the health of the air that people are breathing at the marae, for example, for one thing. So we have to sort of have the kōrero on multiple fronts, and we have to sort of try and make as much of the science, get rid of argument as we can, so that we're not, because nobody, in my opinion, does want to pollute the environment, or to pollute Whareroa Marae, or to pollute the stakeholders. There's a deep desire to not do that, and not be guilty of that. So And I think that, my experience with mana whenua is there is an acceptance of genuineness in the relationship, is what I'm observing. I think that I feel that the leaders of mana whenua are not seeing deception or advocating a profit story without regard to, these wider iwi concerns. So that's a starting point in a sense. And I think that, as Lyndon says, it's got to be relationship building. And the port has got to get better at that, whether it likes it or not. It must be better at the social side of all this. And even though I think that we've had very good leadership at the port, bear in mind we've actually had a change this year in the chair from David Pilkington to Julia Hoare, a mother, who has Māori children, and we've got Dean Bracewell joining the board, who is Ngāti Ranganui descent. And Dean Bracewell, who's a new director on the port. And so the effort inside the boardroom to ensure that we're more focused in the relationship sense and can get a trusted corridor is I think, a key part of all this. And that work and that effort is continuous, and I've got more optimism that we can get there. And around that, because we are 54% owner of the port as Quayside and effectively as council. We are in a stakeholder relationship that is directly accountable as far as iwi is concerned. So I accept that the scrutiny from here about what is being done is very valid. And we're certainly open to all ideas. And if we are successful as the port in the Environment Court, the question then becomes, as you say, Councillor, that we mitigate any ill feeling or adverse consequence of that. I think first and foremost it is about relationships, but it's also about the programs that we're attempting to deploy and use to support iwi welfare. Appreciate there's a bit of that probably comes across as somewhat rhetorical, but it does start with an intentional genuineness to get this right. And hopefully we will.
Thank you, Councillor Scott.
A couple of sets of questions. One is about the just leveraging off Councillor Thompson's questions about who you've spent 3 months meeting, and you would be aware that there's some people who've got a desire to access the funds of Quayside in a way which might be a little bit different from how we've been doing it. That's on your radar, clearly, judging by your smile. Have you got a program for thinking through this to make sure that there's clear communications and what the issues are, and making sure that we don't drift off mission?
Yeah, great question. Yes, 100% I do. I think the strategy day in March will be is something that is vitally important for management. I think for the board, for our shareholders, and I think for the community. For me, we should, once we define what that strategy is, who we are, what we're not, we should be incredibly brave and bold to go out to the community and share that. And there should be, I'd like to think there's no ambiguity around that. Yes, there's been a view that's been shared with me by a number of different constituents that Quayside's sitting on a packet load of money, and we should be giving more of that out to the community. So I have heard that shared with me on numerous occasions. I guess the reality is quite different, as Sir Rob and myself and have shared with you around some of the fiscal constraints that we are starting to face as a result of economic change in economic conditions.
So, and then following up on those economic constraints, the sort of things you went through, Sir Rob, the risk is not the same as lack of predictability. And when things are predictable, there's opportunities. So the returns we've had have been very good in a rising market. Is in a falling, and that's because we've been prepared to take on that higher level of risk, if I understood your presentation, Brendan. And does that mean that in a falling market we have the magnification of our falls might be higher?
The way the portfolio is designed, we should be largely insulated from that. What we're most aware of is not taking on uncompensated risk. So if you boiled our jobs on a day-to-day basis down, all we're really doing is pricing risk. And all of the risks that we've seen, if you think this year, we've got a war in Russia, Ukraine, we've got energy shortages in continental Europe, we've got China flexing its muscles and adopting a zero COVID policy with interest rate rises, inflation, like all of these risks have always been there. I think that it's almost since the financial crisis and the subsequent kind of bailout that happened post that, a lot of people have only really known tailwinds. And any one of these things could have come up at any time. It just seems that they've all decided to rear their heads in the last couple of years. So I guess we've been building for this day for some time. And I think we're pretty confident that we can still deliver, in particular, strong peer relative performance. But it is choppy and it does keep me awake at night.
So one big question is there's absolute returns and peer, and that's, I suppose, the interesting, because if everyone else is doing a hopeless job, then being slightly better than hopeless is not actually still a good measurement. So this is where you earn your money, right? Is where you're actually still good.
Right, last question, Councillor Von Duddleston, but Councillor McDonald, Dean Bracewell is Naitarangi. Councillor Von Duddleston.
Yeah, thank you. Just your comments with regard to Quayside's relationship with Port Business. Just recognising, when I compare it to Auckland, who's had political interference for many years from their council and the problems that they've got into, and one of the key things that our port has managed to achieve is that we, as a council, or through our CEOs, we've been supportive and helpful, but not demanding of our thing. And when we start talking about how can we act as the broker or whatever, I get a little bit concerned. We have two members of the board sitting who understand the situation, and I worry if Quayside gets too far engaged into Port Business, recognising, yes, they are the shareholder on our behalf, but we've made a really conscious effort as council not to interfere, and it's been a very, very successful decision over many years. So that's just a comment.
I would sort of add to that in a sense that one has to be sort of ready in a response market, in a response setting, in the sense that the 54% ownership that comes back to council is kind of recognised by the community, and that's why I agree with you, councillor, that the positions of our various institutions, Quayside first, then council, etc., they're in particular positions relative to the port, but I think where we need to be ready, if we're going to be if we are in that passive end, is to be there with an appropriate response to what the community will say and hold us accountable to. And then the other thing, of course, is through our governance arrangements, ensuring that those we govern are following a strategy that we are comfortable with and influencing to the best of our ability. Yeah.
Yeah. So the port does have a social license to operate, and that has to be a consideration. But I expect that the dealing with that social license is a port responsibility rather than a Quayside responsibility.
Right.
And if the Quayside has to take that same social license into account for its business, the fact that it owns the port is covered elsewhere. So it's just it's a balancing act thing.
Thank you, Councillor, and that's probably an appropriate time to adjourn for morning tea. So could I thank you, Sir Rob, Lyndon and Brendan, as usual, very interesting presentations, and we appreciate the complexity of the market in which you're having to deal with in the next 6 months, and look forward to your next presentation.
Thank you, Mr.
So please
Chairman.
join us down the bottom for morning tea.
Thank you very much.
We'll reconvene in
Thank you,
20
councillors.
minutes. Thank you.
time to look for.
Yes, that seems to be, that should be plenty of time, shouldn't it? Just quickly.
Even with this.
The weather's looking pretty crappy, isn't it? Do you think the plane will actually get to take off? That might be a bit academic.
Thank you. Councillors will reconvene. Arataki report, quarter one performance. Kumaran.
Good morning, councillors. The purpose of this report is to take you through key highlights in terms of council's non-financial and financial performance for the September quarter. Essentially, the report sets out not only year-to-date performance from a financial perspective, but also the forecast position for the rest of the year, and also covers the measures and targets in terms of council's non-financial performance status up for the September quarter. So with me, I have Olive and Mariana, who will take you through the non-financial highlights and financial highlights respectively.
Mr. Chair, okay. In terms of the outcomes, we have had a very successful take-up of the Environmental Enhancement Fund. We currently have received requests for 240,000 against a budget of 300, and we're processing those now. Restoration of the Utahia area of the Lake Rotorua has commenced, and the regional public transport plan adopted. The reports on the service delivery measures, these are the measures as adopted in the long-term plan, and overall we've got 18 on track, 3 where they're not quite, we're anticipating we won't achieve the year-end targets, and there's 23 measures which are reported on an annual basis. So we could not provide results at this time.
Are there any questions of councillors on the non-financial performance?
Councillor Neese.
Oh, thank you. I'm looking at page 88, where we have a measure, State of Environment Reports reported as per schedule. And I think at a previous meeting, we talked about wanting to see the ones that have been produced, and we understood they were on the website. I found them hard to find, and we asked to get them reported through operations and monitoring. But I just wonder if I could have a list of the scheduled state of the environment reports for the year, because it said there, we've obviously got a schedule. I'd just like to see what we're supposed to be producing and when we can expect them. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for the presentation.
Sorry, Kumaran, do you want to answer Councillor Neese?
We'll look to make that available after this meeting to all councillors.
Councillor White.
Thank you for the report. Just on page 84, you make reference under the Hononga Engagement Plan, Kai Tohu Tohu Ropu Technical Māori Advisory Group. Can you remind me who they are? You know?
Yeah, that's the technical group that Katarana put into place with regards to just a handful of there's Katarana there, she might be able to answer.
Oh. Kia ora, Katarana.
Kia ora, Councillor White. Yes, so that Ngā Tohu Tohu consists of Māori technical experts from across the region that have given their time to be on there. So they have come and go because of their busyness. So we've had the likes of Professor Kura Horbuck on there, Anthony Olsen, and people with that capability.
Kia ora, thank you.
Anything else, councillors? Otherwise, we'll move on to the financials.
Tēnā rā tātou, Chairman, Leader, Councillors and Fiona. I refer to Section 3 of Council Arotake Tuatahi report. Council is forecasting a year-end operating deficit 0.8 million lower than budgeted. This lower than planned operating deficit is due to a forecast operating revenue being 0.3 million lower than planned and forecast operating expenditure being 1.1 million lower than planned. The major variances are in public passenger transport and policy and planning. Council is forecasting capital expenditure of 38.7 million, which is 4.3 million higher than budget of 34.4 million. This is primarily due to proposed capital carry forwards from the 21-22 financial year. Council is forecasting capital revenue of 6.4 million, which is 2.3 million higher than budget due to timing of insurance payments. Refer to separate agenda pages 91 to 96, which details year-to-date variances against budget for operating revenue, operating expenditure and capital expenditure, and the impact on forecast reserves balances for the year ended 30th of June 2023. I would like to take the Arotakia report as read and available for any questions or comments you may have.
Thank you, Mariana. Councillors, questions? I think your session yesterday must have been comprehensive. Okay, councillors, no other questions? Anything else to add, Kamara? Okay, can we move to the receipt of the recommendations on page 71? Being moved, Councillor Neves, thank you. Seconded, Councillor Shirley. No further discussion. All those in favour say aye. Against, carried. Thank you. 9.7. Mr. Taylor, Kamaran, are you staying there or?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Councillors will be aware that the review of this policy was asked for some time ago, so it's taken, as I said, some time to get to this point. Unfortunately, Scott Hamilton, who was the Chief Executive of Quayside, worked with myself in the last few years on developing and bringing this policy up to date. So it's a pity that he's not here to take some of the credit for the work that's gone into this, but just trying to reiterate the point that this has been worked through with Quayside, with some of the experience and discussions with Quayside over potential scenarios that may play out. Any policy, of course, can't foresee every scenario and every set of circumstances, but it tries to do that as far as possible can be foreseen. So Jill in my team has worked with me on this policy development, and we bring it here to council for council to consider the approval of this policy for all future recruitment to directors, not just of Quayside. So obviously, as your key 100% CCO, that's the majority of the discussion is usually around the Quayside framework, but this one does fit all of the current CCOs and any future CCOs as well. So we are trying to future-proof it for any potential future CCOs that might come on board as well. So I just ask that council consider in that broader context as well. And happy to answer any questions, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Taylor. So can we concentrate on the improvements to the policy as opposed to the original policy itself? And I think they're well outlined on page 105. Can I just ask, in terms of current practice, the requirement there to do a 3-yearly independent review of the board effectiveness, does that currently take place in our entities?
Not as far as we're aware, Mr. Chairman. So what this tries to do is set a policy framework which asks for that to happen. Should the entities do it more frequently than that, that's great news, but this sort of sets the bar for what would be expected by this regional council to happen.
Okay, and the other question I had was the commentary regarding considering an annual adjustment of fees for inflation. Question that, I mean, that is an option, but the other option, you might want to do it biannually, triennially or whatever, but that should in the first instance be up to the entity, I would have thought.
Yes, and we would hope that through the policy framework, the guidance given to that entity is so that it doesn't get out of step over a long period of time. Of course, you would take guidance from that entity itself, but as you discussed with the report that came this morning on Quayside specifically, the longer you leave it, the more likely you are to have a large increase. So just looking in terms of policy framework, you would expect that indices increase every year should at least be considered.
Okay, councillors, report's open for discussion. Councillor Nees, Councillor McMillan.
Thank you. I just want to be clear for clarity, the difference between this proposal for appointment of directors to Quayside and the Port. The appointment panel in the appendices of the June 2014 policy has been replaced by a nomination panel instead, of which one member is an elected member. Is that right? Yep, that's great. Tick. Then I've got two other issues. One is paragraph 2.9.4 on page 102. It refers to council being required to make a decision whether knowledge of tikanga Maori, whether Te Ao Maori skills are required as a director, whereas the actual Section 57 of the Local Government Act says council must consider whether knowledge of tikanga Maori may be relevant to the governance of that council-controlled organisation. I actually preferred the wording in the legislation as opposed to the wording that staff have put in there, so I guess I would request that that be considered. And then my other potential change is something that we had some discussion earlier today, is on page 123, section 4.2, where we delete the requirement that there be no more than 2 Quayside directors on the port. So we're saying either a council director and a Quayside director, or no more than 2 Quayside directors, independent directors, I presume.
Yeah.
So I would like that second part to be deleted so that we are confirming that we want a council director and a Quayside director on the Port of Tauranga.
So with councillors' agreement, you can make that amendment if you wish me to on that final point. So it'd always be a 1 and 1 rather than a 2, potentially. Okay.
Councillor Easy. And please, councillors, feel free to respond to this, because this is a change. The protocol that's employed at the moment is one issue, but what Councillor Nees is wanting to clearly define is the position that she's got on the table. The protocol at the moment is that's how it actually plays out. Councillor Easy.
Kia ora, Mr. Chair. Just with regards to Councillor Nees' discussion around the rerekētanga, the difference between Te Ao Māori, knowledge of Te Ao Māori and knowledge of tikanga Māori, and what the difference is. I guess Te Ao Māori is, I would say, a more holistic. I would say if you have knowledge in Te Ao Māori, that would include your networks, would be taken into consideration, which may bring value to your position and role within the CCO. You can have, I guess you would assume, I'll also defer to my other colleagues as well. Knowledge in tikanga Māori may be thought as if you can do a karakia and know when to do that and fulfill that role. But I think Te Ao Māori, in my mind anyway, is a much broader awareness of the political landscape, of all of the things that are going on within Te Ao Māori, the networks, and so forth. So my confusion is, are we saying within that particular part of the policy that each appointment must have that skill, or are we saying within the pool there must be at least in terms of recruitment, that there is within the pool of those directors at least somebody who has that skill base of either tikanga Māori or Te Ao Māori? Kia ora.
Thank you, Councillor Uti, and it's clearly not the former, in my view. It's have consideration as to whether Te Ao Māori is a beneficial component of an appointment. Is that right, Mr. Taylor?
Yeah, correct. Yes, you have to consider whether it's a component or not.
And
Councillor.
I guess it was, that's my question within the wording of the policy. I'll have to have a closer look. I would say that that we need to be considering this within the people that we're putting forward, that within the pool, there is that skill base, not necessarily within each candidate. And that's a wording difference.
Yeah, and that would be the expectation of the nominations panel, is that they would consider the current makeup of the board. So as Sir Rob was saying earlier, that skills gap potentially that you would be looking for in that candidate, because the board current composition is whatever it is.
Sorry, Mr. Chair. That is why I prefer the wording in the Local Government Act in section 57, because it says when identifying the skills, knowledge and experience required of directors of a council controlled organisation, the local authority must consider whether knowledge of tikanga Māori may be relevant to the governance of that council controlled organisation. And that's more of a holistic view, a board overview as opposed to an individual overview, I believe. So that's my preference, is we use the word from the legislation, then we can't get it wrong.
So I think to help councillors, on page 115, subset 2.9.4 clearly sets out what you set the expectation of a recruitment panel. So it's a scope that you give the recruitment panel in those items that you wish them to consider in terms of making recommendations to you. I think that covers it adequately. Councillor White, then Councillor Crosby. Councillor White.
Okay. Yeah, kia ora, Mr. Chair. Just getting to the comments that Councillor Iti made around Te Ao Māori and tikanga Māori. He's absolutely right. Te Ao Māori is the wider expression of understanding and knowledge of the system out there, the dynamics at play, the networks, and then within that mix, you're expected to have a sense of the tikanga as well, which is really getting down to the nitty-gritty of the value sets of Māori in the context of doing the right thing, because tikanga means doing the right thing, and the right thing by cultural nuances is important. But we have, you can go as far as a tohunga in our particular setting that actually has a real strong spiritual connect and sense of the depth of spirituality in this particular space. So you get a range of people with those sort of tikanga-based skills, but our Māori skill is actually being able to work in a modern society, occupying a Māori thinking and working through a Māori lens through an understanding of the dynamics at play. So in my view, Te Ao Māori is more encompassing, because it does provide that wider perspective. You can have tikanga Māori, but somebody who's really strong and spiritual and karakia and all those things that come with it is not necessarily strategically positioned to give you the fullest extent of what you're looking for on a board. Looking for on a board, you're looking for that wider ability to understand the dynamics of Māori and how that plays in the decision-making process of different boards. So for me, Te Ao Māori is the right word. Tikanga is isolating it to a tight frame. That's important. It's at the core, but most people who have Te Ao Māori skills will have that at their core to a degree, but not as the depth that others may have. It's a speciality, the depth to which you dive into that space, whereas Te Ao Māori leaves it wide open to participate right across the board in Māori strategic thinking.
Thank you, Councillor White. Councillor Crosby.
Thank you, Chair. Matt, I've always been a little puzzled as to why, and this is actually on 2.6, the ineligibility of the chair to be on Quayside Holdings, and yet the CEO is. And I see a greater conflict, and this is not about people, it's about the position, and have witnessed a greater conflict of the CEO being on Quayside rather than another elected member who just happens to be the chair. Can you explain that? I think I know the answer, but I need to have it confirmed.
We're reflecting the current position of council in the new policy, so I've not had any direction to change that. So it's not, I wouldn't like to give a personal view, but our current policy is from the 2014 policy is that position, and we're repeating that in this new policy update. So it's for councillors to decide whether they want that to continue or not.
Because in my mind, if we reflect on the current conversations of having the best person on a board, the chair at the time may be one of the better people to be on Quayside Holdings rather than the port, which is a different dynamic to it. And I think that seems to be an unnecessary restriction. But I was just wondering if there was any other rationale that was like a conflict or something like that. Because to me, the greater conflict's actually having the CEO of the time actually on the board of Quayside. And I was told by Councillor Nees historically, it was because to improve the communication and the linkages. That's not a good reason. You should address the communication and engagement by a better mechanism than having the CEO as that portal. That's my personal.
Thank you, Councillor Crosby. We'll come back to that. Councillor McMillan.
I'll just make a comment on the Te Ao Tikanga before my question about something else. I suppose from a Pākehā perspective, I sort of think of Te Ao Māori as like the world of Māori, so that real big landscape and understanding everything in that. And tikanga, like Māori practices, I think even a Pākehā could have some understanding of that, but it's almost like a given that we as New Zealanders need to have that. So I think Te Ao is important and that we should be striving to ensure that we have that. My next point is in 2.4 core competencies of board candidates. I'm wondering if we could have a bullet point there in terms of we have declared a climate emergency. Could we have something like the appointed director must commit to overseeing the development of investments that support a low carbon economy and low environmental impact, or something like along those lines. I mean, it would need wordsmithing, but yeah, to me, just having it aligning with core council principles, I would like to pull it out and emphasise it a little bit stronger in terms of our investment portfolio, if that's possible. Kia ora.
Thank you, Councillor. No, I'll come to you, Councillor Shirley Thompson, then Von Duddleson. Can we just note those comments?
I strongly support Councillor Nee's proposal on the Te Ao Tikanga issue. Bearing in mind this panel, it's a discretionary consideration in any event, and I think we're at serious risk of getting ahead of ourselves here and making it far too prescriptive, because we all know the outcomes that we want, and I think it's potentially very dangerous to get ahead of the Local Government Act. I think Section 51 is very clear, and to be trying to, and the trouble is the more prescriptive you become, the more rigid and inflexible you become. And I think that can actually carry a sting in the tail. So I strongly support Councillor Nee's proposal.
Thank you. Councillor Thompson.
Thank you. 3 points. Clause 2.10.4, the annual performance reviews to be undertaken by the chairs and reported to the chair of council. I'd like to see that the chair of council also is required to advise the council in summary form of the outcome of those performance reviews. Secondly, 4.4, council may choose to select one of its members for nomination to the port through Quayside Securities. Can Matt, you confirm that Quayside Security has no discretion to change that nomination from the council through to the shareholder meeting?
It is a nomination, so Quayside Securities, on behalf of Quayside Holdings Limited, make the ultimate decision on who they vote for at the shareholders meeting. So it is a nomination that the council would pass on to Quayside, but Quayside is the voter at the meeting.
Well, I would hate to see a situation arise where there's conflict between what the council decides and what Quayside decides. There should surely be some mechanism in there to try and resolve the issue in an amicable way.
generally speaking, Councillor Thompson, there is a time lapse between having the nomination done and the meeting, and it hasn't happened to date, but if there was, there would be a feedback loop of the intention to vote otherwise to the nomination, and there may well be a further council conversation that would need to go on about that.
We're sort of making notes of these things. And my third point is, I couldn't find it, the requirement for all of the CCOs to report against ESG requirements, environmental, social. Is it in here?
I think it's implicit with some of the regulation changes that are requiring, Quayside presented on that this morning, that there is more requirement to make statutory declarations. So I think through the SOI process, there's an opportunity, SOE and SOI process, there's that opportunity to go further than the minimum required if that CCO is relevant to that particular CCO. It might be more relevant to some than others. So you would take that on a case-by-case basis on the SOE and the SOI with that entity.
So can we record that somewhere? That's what we'll do. Thank you.
Right, anything else, councillors? Councillor Von Duddleton.
Thank you. I absolutely concur, and that's what I was going to raise with what Councillor Shirley said, that we have to be very careful not to be too prescriptive, and that brings me on to Councillor McMillan's point with regard to investment criteria. If we get overly prescriptive, you might get perverse outcomes, and we have to have, when we allow someone to go through as an appointment to our CCOs, we have to trust them to do the right job. There, as you say, within the SOE gives us the ability to actually put some prescription in there, but to actually define it for individuals is actually dangerous and risks. I mean, to even talk about climate change, it's an ambiguous word because it means something different to different people. And so, to get it to work, you'd have to be very prescriptive. And I think that's actually a dangerous, you'll get perverse outcomes. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Von Duddleton. Councillor Scott, then McDonald.
So two issues. One, the first one is regarding Section 57. I think if we're going to reference legislation, we have to report what it says and not interpret it further than what it says. Having said that, having the legislation talks about tikanga, but I take the point that Te Ao Māori is really what is being aimed for on the board, but you don't say you don't say that it's in the legislation when it's not in the legislation. You'd add it as an extra. I'd be prepared to support adding it as an extra sentence or phrase. With regard to, I'm a bit confused with Councillor Nee's suggestion for 4.2. What I would support is that there must be at least one council member, but have I understood you to say that there's no more than one, so it could be 0?
No, the requirement is that there can be no more than 2 representatives on the Port of Tauranga that have been appointed from within the council family. It's always been the case that it's been one council director and one Quayside director, one independent Quayside director. But what we've got here is the ability just to have 2 Quayside directors if they chose not to have a appointed council director. I actually think the principle should be we always should have one council director and one Quayside director represented on the port, rather than the ability to have 2 Quayside directors and nobody directly from within council.
Thanks, that's clear. That helpful. Thank
you. But I think that the current protocol has reigned for last 20 years, is it? But what Councillor Nees is saying is if this body of elected members determines that there's no one suitable, then the default goes to 2 people from Quayside, and that's what Councillor Nees is challenging.
you.
It's most unlikely, but that's what councillor Nees is suggesting. Right, councillors, Fiona, a couple of points, then we need to move to resolve some of these. Oh, sorry, councillor McDonald.
Okay, look, I just want to give my views on the debate we're having over the use of Te Ao Māori skills against tikanga Māori. I think I can understand where you're coming to as well, Jane, around the consistency of conforming with the Local Government Act. However, I would express that in the use of tikanga Māori, that is being more prescriptive than using the terminology of having an awareness of Te Ao Māori skills. And that may be a detriment and when you're electing somebody to sit on the board. Because while you have an awareness of things Te Ao Māori, you may not necessarily be an expert in tikanga Māori, which may be a deterrent when you come to decide upon who you elect to sit on the board. So that's kind of my input in there. But I can understand where you're coming from the consistency of using the Act. But sometimes if we think that the Act itself will challenge our process, then I think we should use the opportunity to make the necessary change for us.
The issue is the board is only required to have consideration whether they're relevant or not. And if we're referencing legislation, then we've got to use the words that are in the legislation and not make it different, is my opinion.
And I guess that's my question really to our policymakers. Are we bound to use legislation, or can we make the changes necessary for our entity to follow?
So through you, Chair, it's one of the points I wanted to let you know about. In terms of your Bay of Plenty Regional Council partnerships with Māori Impact Statement, you include the objective to have Te Ao Māori and Motoranga Māori contribute to informed decision making. So that is why the words Te Ao Māori were included. But can I suggest that you have the reference to the legislation in terms of tikanga Māori added to that section, so you have both? At the moment, you're guided by our legislation, but also your impact statements, and you're clear in your impact statement that you talk about Te Ao Māori and Motoranga Māori contribute to informed decision making, hence why that was the wording proposed by staff.
Councillor Reti, then Councillor White.
Sorry, I was just going.
Oh, sorry.
That sounds good.
Councillor White.
Could probably summarise by doing that too.
Sorry.
The policy says it should be identified if it's a requirement, and that is not what the legislation actually requires. It's about whether it's relevant to the governance.
Whilst the Chief Executive's working through that, can I raise an issue, Matt, in terms of page 149, and it gets back to the director selection for Quayside, which I understand that if a elected member to Quayside was successful in getting a port nomination, they stand down from Quayside.
Sorry, Mr. Chairman, can you just talk through that scenario again?
That if an elected member from this organisation was appointed as a member of Quayside, that if that individual then wanted to take or was successful in getting an appointment to the port, that they stand down from Quayside.
Rather than hold both positions?
Yes.
149 is the old policy that we have, the existing policy. So I'm not quite sure which scenario you're talking about for the new policy.
Okay, well, I'm just reading it in terms of 12.4. It says, in the event that no suitable councillor appointee is available for appointment, an appointment may be made from either appointed councillors of Quayside or the independent directors of Quayside. So the question is, can you be a council appointment to the port and still be an appointed member to Quayside? And if you read the new policy, it says no, doesn't it? You can't hold both.
Yes. Yep, and that's the new policy.
Yeah.
It's only confused me because you were referring to the old policy. Yeah.
Okay. Right. What are the issues, Fiona?
Yes, so in terms of the matter you've talked about, I think our council can either have the wording as per the legislation in terms of section 57 in regards to tikanga, and also you could increase the focus there as per your impact statement, which includes Te Ao Māori and Moturanga Māori contribute to informed decision making. So the council, through its partnerships with Māori impact statement, has extended on their legislation in this regard. In regards to the other points, I think I've captured them all in terms of the additional changes. Can I suggest, in terms of Councillor McMillan, your change to 2.4 and listening to other councillors, that is better addressed through the statement of expectations to Quayside or other CCOs in terms of the direction that you want to set, as opposed to a core competency. In terms of 2.10.4, adding in the words to advise council of performance reviews as well as the chair. And in regards to 4.2, finishing the sentence and removing or no more than 2 Quayside holding directors may be on the board of the Port of Tauranga at any given time. So that sentence is shortened. So the issue, I think, for you is in terms of 2.9.4, whether you want what the legislation says and then you supplement that with what your impact partnerships with Māori impact statement also says. I think that's the key issue that you haven't resolved yet.
I'm happy for, as long as we don't reference the legislation, no, I guess my preference is to just stick to the legislation. And it's about the consideration of whether or not it's relevant to the governance. That's the wording that I prefer, because that's the wording that is actually in section 50, as opposed to tikanga te ao Māori. It's about whether or not it's a requirement or whether or not it's relevant to the governance, because it's different. That there's a difference in a holistic governance or just the position.
So through the addition of the wording, in addition, this may be considered to cover Te Ao Māori. So you would have the legislation requires this, and then in addition, this should be considered as well.
Are you saying that the word relevant is currently being used here, and you're wondering whether it should be the word required rather than relevant?
The policy says the requirement, and the legislation says consider whether it's relevant to the governance.
So we'll change the wording so it's really clear of what's legislatively required. Yes. And then the question, as Fiona said, is whether you have then in addition, which isn't saying it's a requirement, it's something that council is saying is in addition to the requirement of the legislation.
Councillor Shirley.
My view is that the impact statement stands alone, and there's no need whatsoever to supplement the legislative requirement here. I think having both would just sort of get a bit clumsy, and it doesn't distract from the impact statement that we're all adhered to whatsoever. But I think Councillor Nees is quite right. Just a simple statement of the legislation would be the most prudent way to do it.
Right, Councillor White.
I just want to make the point that, Mr. Chair, make it very clear that Te Ao Māori and Tikanga Māori are quite different in their positioning. And from my perspective, it's really important that if we just relieve it as tikanga, then that is not conducive to Māori thinking and participation. Having the addition is fine. And I don't mind relevance, I don't mind that. But I think the positioning of Te Ao Māori in there is actually essential, and so that we do not miss the fact that there is a difference just between Tikanga Māori and Te Ao Māori. There is a difference. And the holistic nature and the value of Te Ao Māori, to me, is paramount in the context of any decisions that we end up having to make. I could sit there and do karakia all day and apply to tikanga Māori and be hopefully totally useless in the conversation around the table, even though it's got a major blessing. The simple fact of the matter is that we are looking for the skill base that can actually be holistic and dynamic in the contributions to the board. So adding it on just makes sure that we are actually emphasising that element and the two go together, but Te Ao Māori is emphasised as well.
Thank you, Councillor White. Right, we need to move to some form of resolution. So in terms of the resolution which carries through onto page 103, it says adopts the updated policy subject to amendments made through this meeting. Can we move through to what those amendments you want captured are? Councillor Thompson.
Well, just referring to perhaps what sounds like the substantive issue, I can't see whether we couldn't have a statement of the legislative provision and then a statement giving discretion to the nomination panel to consider, if appropriate, the Te Ao Māori skills. I cannot understand why we couldn't do that.
So why can't we do that, Fiona? We can.
That's at the bottom of page 115, Mr. Chairman. Nomination panel will consider the core competence in accordance with the nomination panel must seek council's view on whether Te Ao Māori skills are a requirement for each position. So that would be your opportunity to say it is or it isn't.
So that's a briefing to the selection panel.
Each time for the position for whichever CCO is.
So let's try and capture Councillor Nees's suggestion, which was essentially as per the legislation.
Yes. And
the supplement to that is the direction as outlined in 115 here. Is everybody happy with that process? Order. Right. What was the other one? SOEs I've written down.
So through you, Chair, 2.10.4, and that is to also advise council of performance reviews. So it currently talks about the chair only, but those performance reviews come through to council. So it was the addition of the word council. And 4.2, remove the wording or no more than 2 Quayside holding directors may be on the board of the Port of Tauranga Limited at any given time.
I think we need to retain maybe on the board of Port of Tauranga at any one time, so that it will read council to determine no more than 1 council member and 1 Quayside Holdings director may be on the board of the port.
Correct. Yeah. Yes. So we're just removing the words or no more than 2 Quayside holding directors.
Yeah. So Crosby.
Haven't addressed the issue I raised, and just listening to the conversation, and this is 2.6 in terms of limitations. The sense I'm getting is that there is no reason why the chairperson cannot remain on Quayside, but should not hold dual positions on Quayside and the port. And when you look at the way it's written, there could be a circumstance if there's a change of chair and the current director, elected member director on Quayside, would have to then leave. They could be more valuable, to be honest, on Quayside than on the port. And another elected member could be the port director. I just see this as limiting unnecessarily a set of circumstances that could play out. I would suggest for discussion, and easy to be persuaded otherwise, that the limitation should only be that the chair should not be on either Quayside Holdings and the port at the same time.
I thought that was the understanding.
Yes. 2.6.
The limitations on eligibility, yes.
And according to Matt, it was a convention. Well, we used to have, horse hitching rails here too. That was a convention, but time moves on. And I honestly, I just see a particular set of circumstances where this just may not make sense in terms of the skill sets of the particular people involved.
Right, councillors, your deliberations, your decision. You understand what Councillor Crosby is saying, that the second paragraph there should not be in there. Is that right, Stuart?
Just to be...
But there should, but the chairperson should not hold dual positions
Yeah.
on Quayside Holdings
and the port. Yeah.
That's the limitation.
Yeah.
I think is the correct one.
Yeah.
We could
So,
capture that, can't we?
so the issue is that the convention has been that the chairperson be on the Port of Tauranga. The contrafactual of what Stuart is suggesting is that it could be anyone. Anybody from
Yes.
council could be the appointee to the
Yep.
Port of Tauranga.
Councillor Scott.
Yeah, I think a concern is that as an organisation, and we're sort of limited by elections, but it's important to think about growing the skill set of or ensuring that there is continuing skills and experiences across the entire elected membership. And if we aren't careful, we could end up with a very limited number of elected members having more experience, influence, participation, leaving other members at a standing start should there be a change at an election time. And I think it's a risk of an elected organisation, I guess. So that would be my big concern.
Thank you, but that's the fact of life that we live with, isn't it? In terms of the triennium type elections that you've got. Right, so councillors, as per the legislation, plus the addition of the appointments panel, the chair, I think, implies council, but we can, reporting to the chair on the performance of that, it's implied, I think, in my view, that would come to council anyway. And the last one is the issue Councillor Crosby raised, which is you cannot be the dual role on Quayside and the port, but you could be chair of council and on Quayside. Have we captured that? Does everybody fully understand those? Right, can I move through to the resolution? Have a mover and seconder, please. Councillor Nees? Yes. Councillor Reety, everybody clear? Fiona.
I'm just not clear. I'm very sorry about this in terms of 2.9.4. What you want to do is replace with wording from section 57 and that the nomination panel must also seek council's views on whether tikanga Māori and te ao Māori are relevant for each position. That is the wording that you'd want, just to be very clear.
My suggestion was are relevant for the governance of that organisation.
But it's both tikanga and te ao Māori. Yeah, thank you.
Right, we're clear. It's been moved. Do we have a seconder?
Yes,
Councillor White, Councillor Eaty, sorry. Yes. All those in favour say aye. Against, carried. Whew, thank you. Quayside Holdings, statement of expectation.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Next item. So this is our annual statement of expectation draft for council to consider. We do this now every December meeting in advance of Quayside preparing their draft statement of intent. It gives useful background and up-to-date information to guide Quayside's preparation of statement of intent. And yeah, happy to answer any questions on the direction.
Okay, thank you, councillors. Questions?
Mr. Chair, I'm reminded of the LGFA presentation to us and the way that they reported on their ESG policies. And I remember saying at the time that I had hoped that this would be, that Quayside would have a look at this and consider emulating that, just as when they started their ESG work, they emulated their super fund. And I was wondering whether there's some elegant wording that we could add into the letter of expectations that we suggest they have a look at the benchmark position on reporting on ESG that the LGFA has established, something like that, just to give them a little bit more guidance as to what we would like to see in the future?
The Chair, I know I had a conflict here, but it probably wasn't touched on in detail by Lyndon's presentation. But they have chosen, and I think before that you might want to see in detail the proposal, which is in terms of reporting on how they're doing it. It's a very, very in-depth, complex matrix of just about everything you could imagine. And I'd really encourage Quayside to present that to you. It's called 1.5 as a program, and I can assure you it is very in-depth. So before that, you just might want to have a quick presentation of it. Thank you.
And also, I can say that staff talked to Quayside before they provided this draft statement of expectations. There was going to be much more in here in terms of the financial disclosures required, and that was removed based on that conversation in regards to what Councillor Crosby was talking about. And so it would be good to get that information to Council in terms of exactly what Quayside is doing.
Can we change the wording to we welcome a presentation on your proposed reporting mechanism, blah, blah, blah. Thank you.
Councillor Von Duddleton.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. On page 156 of the report, or 161, as per the diligent strategic land holdings, it says council, that's the regional council, has an interest in the Tauriko land, which Quayside currently holds on behalf of council. I don't believe that is a strategic holding. If it is, it needs a better explanation as to why it is. And if we're looking to buy land at Tauriko for transportation issues as per the annual plan, then surely this is if this is strategic, it's not strategic to council in my view. It might be strategic to Waka Kotahi, but it's certainly not to us per se. And I want a clarification on that before we finalise that statement of expectation. The other concerning thing in the statement of expectation that concerned me was the chief executive talking about brokering between parties regarding the port. And I think somewhere in the statement of expectation that leads me to think that we need to clarify that we have to be very careful that Quayside, as our CCO, as we do as individual, as a council, do not get involved in the day-to-day strategy for the port. I think that that would set a very poor precedent, and maybe it would be worth just alerting it somewhere, but not nothing. It just wants covering, I think, in the SOE.
Thank you, Councillor Von Duddleton. So it's my recollection that the mandate given to staff on Tauriko being a strategic asset came from this body. And if councillors want to change that, we should change it. But that's a directive you gave to Quayside, and as you well know, that investment, frankly, hasn't washed its face since day one, and you need to stand back from that, and I'll take advice from Quayside as to doing that. Councillor Thompson. Sorry? Well, we can remove it.
I think we need to do some work on it before we take it out.
3, Mr. Chairman. So would it be useful if council and Quayside bring a report back, which would be covered in the SOI for next year, on the intention for this land? I think because that's what's missing here, isn't it? Is the holding position is please keep holding the land, but as Councillor Von Duddleton says, we need a strategy for why we're holding it, and that has changed over time. It was originally held for the potential building of our offices. There are potential other opportunities that are opening up. I'd like to work with Lyndon and his team to bring back a report both to the Quayside Board and to Council on what the strategy would be. And if the intention is not to hold it, then you dispose of it. But we would bring a report, both Lyndon and I, back to both governance bodies to see whether it's a strategic land holding or not.
I support that, but the bottom line here is it was this body of elected members who determined to Quayside that we want you to hold as a strategic investment. Let's revisit it. That's what you're saying. Great. Councillor Thompson.
Yeah, just page 154, and it's the third paragraph up from the bottom. And it reads, Council wants to place emphasis on working with its partners to identify opportunities for Bay of Plenty leaders to collaborate. I would like that wording changed, and I'm suggesting Council wants to place emphasis on working with its partners, stakeholders and communities to deliver more, etc. So take out Bay of Plenty leaders, because if I hear that expression one more time, I'm going to blow a foo-foo valve, because who are they? And I really want the word communities front and centre in terms of this. And by the way, we couldn't just change a decision on Tauriko today. I think you need to look at standing orders for that.
Yeah. Thanks, Councillor Tom. Councillor Scott.
Yeah, 4 issues, same paragraph. Yeah, that also concerned me about the implication that Quayside is more than our investment vehicle. The end of that, so the second thing is the end of that sentence about particularly in relation to climate change. The trouble with that, I think someone earlier said that it's a vague statement, and we've seen how that changed even at the COP-out conference, where the International Panel for Climate Change has recommended a lower risk factor down to 2.5. So that could actually lead to perverse investment outcomes. I think the market will tell you what good things are, and we do have an expectation around the ESG reporting. So I think that would cover that. I would remove that as a particular. On page 155, under investment performance targets, it talks about given the current volatility of the financial markets, Council would like Quayside to consider feasibility and implications, so on. I think we have if we don't, we should. And talking to Brendan, I think we do have a strategy which looks beyond the current volatility of something. We've got to rely on our investment strategy to see through short-term changes. And my question earlier on about if our investments are going really, really well in the good times, do we change our rules in the bad times and give ourselves a free pass? I think that's a very dangerous way to go. So I'm not happy with that at all. And the final one is also about the Tauriko land. I think we're going to discuss that. If it's an investment thing, then that should be a Quayside decision. If it's something strategic, then we should understand why it's strategic and not just because it's a nice piece of green land. Thank you.
Thank you. So similarly, I had concerns around the overall themes and in terms of climate change. I thought it was far too directive, and I agree with your position. Similarly, the one in terms of investment performance targets, I had similar concerns about that. But I think that in essence must have come from Quayside, and I think that's probably appropriate. The other one, which you might want to give me some explanation about, Matt, is Toimana Trust, the last comment there. Can you just expand on that? And whilst you're doing that, or the rationale, whilst you're doing that, Councillor McMillan.
Sure. I'd just like to remind us that in 2019 we did declare a climate emergency. To me, the word emergency means that it's pretty front and centre of all our decision making, and should be. And with a climate, with that paragraph, I don't see that that's inhibiting our investment and our opportunities. It's just putting a decision-making lens, and there's plenty of options that I really don't see that we can remove that. I think it's really important. It's really, really important. Thanks.
Thank you. Answer to my questions.
Yes, Mr. Chairman. So what Quayside have been in discussions with us around how they calculate the 5% return.
Yep.
So because the fund value, as you've seen from the graphs, goes up and down,
Yep.
our assertion has been it should be based on face value, not on the declining value. So therefore, the amount is certain to us in the planning cycle, and that should council want to still receive the 5% return, it's recognised that if the value of the fund declines, it may be the fund itself that is used for that dividend value, because we've budgeted for that and we've set rates based on that amount. So it was being really clear with Quayside that it's the face value, the amount of money that's invested, that is the way the 5% is calculated in the SOI, because at the end of the day, it's the SOI of Toi Moana that we're talking about here, and that amount would be a fixed sum that you could then budget on the basis of.
But therein lies the problem and the challenge for Quayside, because if it doesn't perform to that level, they've got to ensure that that cash dividend coming back to us comes from other sources, right?
Yes, Mr. Chairman. And as you heard from today, and this is also included in that sentence, of the interest rates are rising, and the question with Quayside, is the 5% the right amount? Should it be higher? Rather than which calculation is done, whether it's 70 million or 68 million or 67 million. The 70 million is the amount that the council's invested, and the 5% is the discussion on risk and the value of that money.
So that then raises the issue, if they overperform as Quayside, do they keep it?
No, so that's that part of the discussion we've had through the SOI is that fund is held on council's behalf. So any growth in that fund will be available to this council at the end of the term of the Toi Moana, whenever you determine that is. So that money is ring fenced just to be used by council because it's council's funds.
But that's the point. You overperform some years and use that overperformance to smooth out the years when we're going backwards. So that's the point of having a constant return.
Thanks.
But my position was the overperforming, who does it rest with in terms of not the capital amount, but the increased growth? Does that overperformance rest with Quayside, or does it come back to the council?
Comes back to the council because it's your funds that you invest as ratepayers' money.
But if you underperform, it's got to be supplemented from somewhere else.
Yes, then that's the point. If it underperforms, it's up to council to decide that 5% is too high, or that you don't have that fund.
Yeah. Councillor Nees and Von Duddleson.
Well, thank you. I just want to comment in support of Councillor McMillan. Really because of a conversation I had over morning tea with Brendan with regard to the analysis that they undertook for the P.F. Olsen purchase. Yep. And one of the considerations was that there is a huge opportunity for using wood chip for biofuel. And so therefore it was a big tick for their decision on getting into that investment. So to me, it's quite a valid thing to that it was a matter of consideration for them. It wasn't just about being exporting logs to China. It was about potentially instead of shipping logs at a lower cost, lower revenue over to China, but having the opportunity to have them processed at a higher value within New Zealand and producing biofuel, which could then be used. And I forget the two industries that he was talking about that it could be potentially used for. And so that to me validates that paragraph that we've got in here. It's another consideration for them that if they can get a win-win-win on an investment, then and it's one of our strategic priorities, then we should have it reflected in this statement or letter of expectations.
Councillor Von Duddleson.
Yeah, just to especially for new councillors to alert them that the Toi Moana Fund was originally set up with, I'm going off memory, 25 million was the first tranche put into it, and that they actually the net fund went down within the first 6 months, so it made a negative return, and And that's what you're faced with this, but we're looking at long-term gain. So you've got the market will always maneuver. So it's not, for us investing in the Toi Moana Fund, if we put too high pressure on Quayside to actually get a certain outcome in a short period of time, we can absolutely stifle their ability to get long-term returns, and that's what we're asking for, I think. Has Toi Moana, I know we've invested more in there now, is there anything in their investment criteria that talks about time?
So it was 45 million originally, and we added 25 to make it 70.
Yeah.
And we give direction to Quayside that this money is to be held for 5 to 7 years. So exactly as you said, Councillor Van Daleson, it's a medium to long-term investment. You saw the numbers that were presented by Lyndon today, that it's around about that 5% return that they're getting at the moment on the overall picture. There's actually high 5s or 6s on those bonds at the moment. So the interest rates coming up has certainly supported the cash payment. So they're much more confident of that cash payment of 5%. Having said that, a year ago, as we sat here with Quayside, they weren't confident of being able to achieve that 5%. They're much more confident now of being able to achieve the rate of return that you've expressed in your SOI. And this statement of expectation reflects that, is that interest rates are rising and there's more confidence in the 5%. So what we're asking for is a further conversation on whether that 5% is now too low or not.
Thank you, councillors. Right, just one comment I really raised with Chief Executive under strategic land holdings. I think we should be clear that when it's determined that Rangiuru business or Rangiuru is a strategic land holding, I'd be interested in the Quayside Director's comments, that it shouldn't be taken or implied that that necessarily should be the position going forward. So originally Rangiuru was to be a land holding that I understand Quayside was looking to pass on to a developer. Latterly, the decision was made you're going to be the developer yourself, but into the future, I think the expectation should be that if there are market opportunities to relinquish the ownership of lands, either whole or part, then that's under the mandate of Quayside. Stuart?
I think you're correct. The other component part, well, historically, the only reason we could achieve Rangiuru was two reasons. One, the 18 million from the PGF to assist in the flyover, and the utilisation of the local government funding agency resources. That was the trigger to make it work, and subsequently the square metre rate has gone up considerably. The other element you might need to remember is that Quayside is effectively an endowment fund. So strategically, Quayside may wish to retain some land within Rangiuru and build vertically to have that enduring revenue going through, more than likely with a partner. So yes, that should really be a decision for Quayside, whether it relinquishes all the land, which it could frankly do tomorrow. But we're being strategic about, one, the tenants that will go in there or the purchasers, and secondly, a conversation, should Quayside retain some land and joint venture to do some vertical builds to have that enduring revenue coming through rather than a one-hit wonder.
So just again for new councillors and understanding, when our Rangiuru was, the land was bought for a future development, at that stage, Quayside could not develop the land themselves because they would have tainted the port by becoming a developer. Legislation has since changed that allows them to be a developer. So, you know, what started out isn't where it's ended up, because, and that's a matter of tax legislation.
Councillor White.
Yeah, just to support what Councillor Crosby has commented about Quayside. I just add another point in there that maintaining that level of flex is important for Quayside. Having said that, I am sure that they will have some conversation with Mana Whenua as well in that particular process. before disposing of lands. And I say that because the case of, all sorts of other things like wahi tapu and all those sorts of things exist on that particular land. And we've discovered some of those and been working closely with the mana whenua in terms of mediating those spaces. So it comes to me with that sort of caveat that there will be some conversations that Quayside would hold with mana whenua on any disposal of lands and the consequences of that in the context of their, their tūranga wāwai.
Order, Councillor White. Right, councillors, can we move through to the resolution, which is pretty straightforward, but before we adopt it in terms of 2, Fiona, are there some adjustments that councillors want captured in here?
Yes.
Now, this is by way of consensus or vote.
So based on your discussion, and just to be clear again, and staff will be clearer in future reports, you have a climate change impact statement. So some of the wording in this statement of expectation is driven from your climate change impact statement, in particular, that you're seeking transformational shifts required for the Bay of Plenty, including investors in our region support low carbon transitions. And that was the wording that led to that paragraph and the overall themes.
So can we replicate that in there?
Yes. So what I'm proposing, some of the changes you've talked about, is in the overall themes section that council wants to place emphasis on working with its partners, stakeholders and its communities to identify opportunities to collaborate and deliver more for residents, particularly in relation to climate change. Council is seeking a transformational shift for investors in our region to support low carbon transitions. And then go on to say that you are interested in getting a report back from Quayside on its climate disclosure related reporting, and also to say that you would seek for Quayside to look at the LGFA benchmark reporting on ESG reporting.
The only problem I have with that is that it raises one of the well-beings at the expense of the others, and I don't think that's really what we want to intend.
Is that the ESG reporting?
Yeah, well, yes. Well, the ESG is part of what they should be reporting anyway. But by having, particularly in relation to climate change in our statement of intent, are we not interested in economic development? Are we not interested in any of the other well-beings? And I think it can be misleading in that respect. In the end, we've got to make sure that our ratepayers are not disadvantaged by having an investment strategy which actually leaves them worse off. When if it's a good strategy, then they should be doing it. And one of the measures is the ESG, so it's there anyway. I think it just redirects an investment strategy in a way that could be counterproductive.
And that's why the issue of being too directive complicates matters, because you're right, it's getting the balance right between the trade-offs that are required. I don't think that precludes that, does it?
Doesn't, no.
Wouldn't support any deletion.
Okay, I think we can live with it, Councillor Scott. Right, that's the last.
And one other further change, and also a note, and I think it's under the Port of Tauranga section, Council's expectation is that Quayside does not get involved in the day-to-day activities of the Port of Tauranga Limited, which was a point that you made. And finally, to note that there will be a report back on Tauriko land as part of the draft statement of intent. Presentation.
Just going to get some clarity on the day-to-day operations. I'm not quite clear on that. I mean, does that refer to the brokering statement that Councillor Von Dadelson raised in the context of not getting too deep in the business of the port?
Yes, that's my summary in terms of the change that he was seeking to the statement of expectation. That Council's expectation is that Quayside does not get involved in the day-to-day activities of the port.
I'm not sure. From my point of view, a little bit of flex. Sometimes when he is referring to brokering, I took it as supporting the development of relationships and positive relationships and reciprocity out there, which sometimes Quayside's involvement in that might be appropriate and strategic. And that's just my view. When I took that notion of brokering, it was helping and supporting, building the relationships and dealing with some difficult issues that I think the board might welcome from time to time.
Okay, your points have been noted. But let's remember, the port is an autonomous entity in its own right. It's a listed company. We just happen to be the largest shareholder. To date, either this entity as council or Quayside have not taken a material role in terms of directing the port what to do. They can seek accountability in terms of a whole range of things, a social license to operate, and that's fair and reasonable. But Councillor Von Duddleston does raise a fair point in terms of crossing the divide, in terms of seeking feedback, accountability in terms of what are the issues port's considering as opposed to being directive. Right, Councillor Nees, then we're going to the vote.
Yes, sorry, I was just, I'm supporting Councillor Von Duddleston because what has been successful is the arm's length monitoring of the port rather than getting involved in their business. And so therefore I support his statements.
Right, thank you, councillors. Can we move to the resolution? Will someone move noting the Chief Executive's commentary? I'll move. Seconder. Councillor McMillan. All those in favour say aye. Against, carried. Thank you. Delegations manual. Jessica. And Monique. Hope, councillors, you've waded through the comprehensive appendices that came with this. There you go, Jessica.
Kia ora koutou. For those of you that I haven't met, I'm Jessica Easton, the Legal and Commercial Manager here. I have Monique Brooks, Legal Counsel from my team here as well, and Matt here to talk to the financial delegations. So the Chief Executive's Delegation Manual contains functional delegations for staff, which effectively are delegations that arise from statute. Over the last year, the legal team has spent quite a bit of time reviewing and updating the Delegations Manual, and back in September we brought this revised Delegations Manual to Council for approval, and we committed to ensuring that the Delegations Manual was kept up to date, and the way that we intend to do that is to bring it to the new council in each triennium, which also allows the new council the opportunity to gain awareness of these statutory delegations and ask any questions or raise any concerns. One major difference with this Delegations Manual from what we brought in September is that it now contains as an appendix the financial delegations as well. So I think Councillor Nees, you had asked that at the previous meeting. This one does contain the financial delegations. We have made some changes which are listed. Which page numbering are you going off? We've got 158, or I think the diligent number is 163. Sorry, 164 are the amendments that we've made since September. Some of those changes are just things like updating roles. So where we've had changes to job titles or creation of new roles, we've updated that. Some clarifications around when we're dealing with Public Works Acts, that we have a different process in place when we're acquiring rights for, say, easements over acquiring land itself. And there are a lot of other amendments in there that are detailed, which we're happy to answer any questions to, but those were really the main areas of change. And then in terms of the financial delegations, I'll hand over to Matt to talk to some changes that were made there.
Any questions, councillors? Councillor Thompson?
Yeah, just before we go to the financial delegations, I just need some clarification around the actual delegation under Section 33 of the Resource Management Act, and that is the delegated authority for the Chief Executive to be able to transfer or accept the transfer of functions, powers and duties from or to another public authority, and public authority has a very broad meaning. So is that the case, that the Chief Executive has or is proposed to have those powers? Because that strikes me as being something that the council should be considering.
So through you, Chair, that is what I understand currently happens in practice. An example of that is where I'm just thinking in terms of the air quality bylaw sorry, no, not that one, the enforcement and monitoring of lake structures over in the Rotorua Lakes. We have an agreement in place, or have done for a number of years, with us and RRC, which was signed off by the Chief Executive. Obviously, if council isn't comfortable with that and it's something that needs to be brought to council, we can absolutely amend that.
My own view is that it's not that I am uncomfortable with our Chief Executive being able to, but I just believe it's a matter of good working practice that the council is fully appraised of any of those kinds of relationship changes and is kept firmly in the loop. So either a reporting back to us or a reporting before it happens or something, but I do believe it's important because it does go to the heart of relationships, be it with tangata whenua, be it with other TLAs, be it with whomever. So that would be my point. Thank you.
Councillor Nees.
Thank you. And I had a concern about that as well, because it could be very broad. It could be, for example, Western Bay passing their dog registration responsibilities to us, and there's resourcing and there's budgetary considerations. So I think there's a significance threshold somewhere in here. But at the very least, we want to be, for anything that had substantial resource or cost implications, I think it should come to council for a decision. If it's not got any substantial implications, then at least we should be advised.
Just to clarify on that point, so yes, there is essentially a significance degree attached to what in the policy that's within there. So anything, while a staff member may have a delegation under the delegations manual, they still need to have regard to the significance of the decision and escalate that accordingly.
The clarification is for the Chief Executive, her financial delegation is now 500,000. So that isn't the threshold you're talking about here for the transfer of powers, is it?
Yeah, that relationship, which is central to our way of working, that, we need to make sure that, we are kept on top of changes in relationships, positive. That to me is another threshold matter.
But I think, Fiona, the cardinal position here is the delegations cannot go outside those ones that are agreed to financially. With the annual plan.
Yeah, correct.
So they all have to be signed off by council, but the implementation of it, whatever the financial limit is it going to be 200,000?
So Matt's going to talk to that now in terms of the financial delegations, but I can absolutely give my assurance that I'd be reporting back on any of those matters. Yeah.
So through Mr. Chairman, just on the financial delegations, like all previous delegations, they're all set within the remit of approved long-term plans and annual plans, and the process for significance and engagement policy rules and procedures around that are already in place. So what the delegations do is they allow that business that you've approved to go ahead and for things to happen on the ground. So there are there's no way of going around. The approval has to be in the long-term plan or the annual plan. So you have to approve those things happening, and the significance and engagement policy covers that. In this financial delegations part, as Jess said, I apologise for not bringing this to you at your September meeting when the other delegations were done. We weren't quite ready to bring it, so it's good timing that we're now doing this, and I do intend to do that as part of our new triennium setup as well, as Jess said, for all of our delegations. This puts all of those things in one place. In the past, for instance, the Treasury delegations have been done in isolation to the other financial delegations, so this does provide that clarity. You'll note that the list of exclusions is nearly as long as the inclusions. So it's giving clarity to people about what they can't do as well as what they can do. Councillor Nees has already pointed out that, well, the one change in here is that we're looking to increase Fiona's delegation because over time the 400,000 isn't worth as much as it was. So it just raises that from 400 to 500, but that's consistent with the delegation you've given before. So yeah, happy to answer any questions, but this allows us to get on with the business and get the action done on the ground.
And if we want to change any of these thresholds, we do it through the LTP.
These thresholds would be done at the start of every triennium. We wouldn't expect that you would do them more regularly than that. If something changes in the LTB significantly, we would then pick up that the next time we do the delegations manual, but we wouldn't expect you would change them more often than every 3 years.
So the last comment in there regarding the delegations to enter into contracts up to 40 million is substantive.
In the Treasury delegations, that's an existing delegation that council has set. So if, for instance, you wanted to borrow 200 million and it's not in the LTP now, you're right, we might come back and say, oh, for that delegation, will you please delegate that to the chief executive? But we don't envisage that at the moment.
Discussion, councillors? Otherwise, we'll move to the recommendations. Someone prepared to move? Councillor Von Duddleston, Councillor Shirley, all those in favour say aye. Against, carried. Thank you. 9.10, Regional Safety Rescue Service. Ruben and Graham, or whoever's doing it.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good afternoon, councillors. Nothing to add to the report, but Graham is here to answer any questions if anybody has some.
Questions, councillors? Councillor Winters.
I'm just trying to find my. With the in the surf life saving, it talks about us funding rescue craft. So I hope we're not duplicating what Coast Guard's doing because they have jet skis on the ground as well.
So it's not in duplication. There have been services that Surf Lifesaver have with their inflatable watercraft and those sorts of things, predominantly in the Tauranga clubs, which have been provided, but it is separate to the Coast Guard services that are provided.
Happy to move, Mr. Chair.
Councillor Von Duddleston, thank you. Councillor Winters. Councillor.
Just a query, this is surf life saving, but it's not Coast Guard, and we strongly support, and I've got no problem with this level of funding because it's something we took a long time to discuss previously, but we seem to have left Coast Guard out of our funding model. Can staff explain that? I mean,
Through you, Chair. So through our most recent round of regional service, the funding that we allocated earlier on this year, for the first time we did include some funding for Coast Guard. So I think the actual level of funding was it 20,000 per year? 20,000 per year.
Yeah.
Yeah, I realise that, but 20,000 versus 292,000, I think they're both safety issues, and I just think one's proportionately out of kilter with the other a little bit. That's all.
Thank you, Councillor Von Duddleston. I think we just got to be careful that you could add a whole lot of other entities to this list, such as the rescue helicopter and those things. And as long as we stick to the process of going through, giving them opportunity to put a bid in, that's where your deliberation needs to be as to the allocation. Councillor White and Councillor McMillan.
Yeah, thank you for the report. Just reading through it, I surf life saving absolutely necessary. Makatu and Nudix Beach. I note that there is, you mentioned Nudix Beach is, very important to look at. Right now it is quite bare, yet it's very popular. And I have witnessed children going out beyond the waves, and it's sort of an unscoped area. It looks safe and looks flat and everything else, but I think equally it's potentially be quite dangerous. So I would certainly put a plug in for Nudix Beach. The other thing was interesting, the increase in great white sharks. That just caught my attention. And a couple of big guys caught in the net of some of the places, and of course Waihi Beach incident. So I guess they've always been there, but they seem to be getting closer, more noticeable. You got any comment on that?
Answer is no.
That'll do.
Thank you, Councillor McMillan.
Yeah, I was just wondering, do we brand these things that we fund with our logo as well as theirs? And if not, why not? And is it a strategic opportunity in terms of awareness of some of the things Regional Council does?
Typically, we do have our branding with the services that we fund, but certainly I can follow up directly on this one.
It's been moved by Councillor Winters. Do we have a seconder? Councillor Campbell. All those in favour say aye. Against, carried. 9.11 has been withdrawn. We move to public excluded. I move that we go to public excluded.